When my daughter-in-law said, "We're not running a charity for old people," she was standing at my own kitchen counter, pouring almond milk into her coffee like she owned the place. I had my hands wrapped around my chipped blue mug, the one I'd had since we bought the duplex 35 years ago. The morning light was coming in from the window over the sink, catching in the steam and in the streak of gray in her ponytail. She's only 40, but stress has already started marking her. I'm 69. I live on the ground floor of the house my late husband and I bought when we still thought life would never run out of years. My son, Brian, and his wife, Kelsey, live upstairs with my teenage granddaughter. The arrangement, at least in my mind, was that they would have security and I would have family close by. Warmth on the stairs. Someone to help change light bulbs and carry up the salt for the icy steps. That morning, there was no warmth, just cold air between us, even though the heat was on. "I don't know what you mean," I said. My voice came out softer than I liked, like I was the one intruding. Kelsey rolled her eyes the way some younger women do when they've decided they're done pretending. She stuck her phone between her shoulder and her cheek and stirred her coffee. "Brian and I talked," she said. "We can't keep doing this, Linda. You're a grown adult. You can't just stay here indefinitely like it's some charity for old people." She said it like old people was a category of problem, like mildew or taxes. Something inside me did a small, disbelieving laugh. "Charity?" I repeated. "Kelsey, I pay—" "I know you pay what you can," she cut in, phone still against her ear, texting with one hand. "But with property taxes and insurance and everything going up, we're basically covering you. We can't keep subsidizing your lifestyle. We have Emma's college to think about. Our retirement, it's not fair." It was the word subsidizing that stung me more than old people. Maybe you've had that happen too. Some plain little word hitting harder because of what it means beneath the surface. I glanced over at the key rack by the back door. My house key hung there, the brass worn smooth where my thumb always rests, on the same red leather keychain we'd bought at the hardware store the day we signed the mortgage on this duplex. Next to it hung Brian's keys with his gym tag and his little plastic grocery store card. They swung slightly in the heat draft, side by side. Subsidizing. Charity. Old people. My name was still the only one on that mortgage, but in that moment, standing in my own kitchen in my faded blue robe, I realized Kelsey didn't know that. Maybe Brian had never told her. Maybe he'd let her believe things that were easier for him. The idea slid in like a cold coin into my pocket. They think they're keeping me. They think I'm the charity case here. That was the moment I understood something I should have learned years ago. Money wasn't really the issue. I was. Or rather, my place in their minds was. The humiliation didn't land all at once. It was like a slow seep through the day. After breakfast, I pretended nothing had happened. I rinsed my mug, listening to her feet on the stairs as she went back up to their part of the house. The ceiling creaked the way it always had, the way it did when Brian was a little boy running laps until his father yelled up for him to settle down. I wiped the counter in small circles, round and round. The sunlight on the laminate made every nick and stain show. I'd cooked so many meals in that kitchen. Spaghetti nights when Brian would come home from his job at the auto shop, smelling like oil and sweat, his eyes bright because Kelsey had said yes to going out with him. Thanksgiving turkeys, the casseroles I made for neighbors who had lost someone. You might think that at my age I should be hardened to little cruelties, but it doesn't work like that. If you're a woman my age, the cuts still land, they just land on older skin. Around 10, Brian knocked lightly and leaned into my doorway without waiting for an answer. "Hey, Mom," he said, almost cheerful, like Kelsey's words had never happened. "You got a minute?" He has his father's brown eyes, but the rest of him is Kelsey now. His haircut, his clothes, his constant phone checking. He sat at the table across from me, where I'd laid out the newspaper and my reading glasses. "What's up?" I asked, folding the paper closed. He cleared his throat. "So, Kelsey talked to you a little this morning about money." "A little," I said. "Well," he went on, rubbing his hands on his jeans, "we've been doing the math, and honestly, this setup, it's just not sustainable. Taxes went up again, the water bill, everything, and the rent we're getting from the upstairs apartment isn't covering what it used to." "You mean the rent you pay me?" I said. He blinked. "What?" "The rent," I repeated. "From the upstairs. From you. You pay me rent, not the other way around, remember?" Somewhere in his brain, something flickered, but he pushed past it. Right, he said quickly. "But because we're handling everything, the repairs, the online bill pay, dealing with the city, it's basically our house now, in every way that matters. You're getting older, Mom. You shouldn't have to worry about this stuff. We've been talking about maybe moving you into one of those senior apartments, independent living. They've got shuttles, activities, all that." I stared at him. The room felt like it shifted slightly, like when a train goes over a bad section of track. "I'm not worried about this stuff," I said slowly. "I've been handling this stuff for 35 years. Your father and I signed that mortgage. We paid every payment. We refinanced once. I remember the interest rate on every piece of paper. Don't talk to me like I don't know what a water bill is, Brian." His jaw tightened. "That's not what I meant." "What did you mean then?" He tapped his fingers on the table, avoiding my eyes. "Look, we're adults with our own lives. We can't build our future around making sure you're financially okay. That's on you. We can't be your safety net." Right then, the furnace kicked on with a wheeze, followed by the familiar whoosh of warm air in the vents. It sounded a little like my husband's sigh used to sound when he'd come home from double shifts at the factory. A memory washed over me, triggered by that sound, so vivid I could smell the paint. We were young, standing right here in this kitchen. Boxes still in the living room, the walls half primed. I was holding that same red keychain in my hand. The key metal felt cold and new. "Can you believe this is ours?" I'd said, laughing, giddy and exhausted. Tom had taken my hand, pressing it and the key against his chest where his heart beat strong under his work shirt. "It's not just a house, Lynn," he'd said. "It's a promise. We're building something for him." He nodded toward the playpen where baby Brian was sleep-kicking. "He'll never have to wonder where he belongs." I'd believed him. For decades, I lived as if that promise were a law of the universe. The memory evaporated, and I was back at the table with our grown son. "You've never been my safety net," I said. "I've been yours." He looked annoyed. "That's not fair. We pay you rent." "And how much is that again?" I asked. He said the number. It was low. We'd kept it that way on purpose, Tom and I, to help him get on his feet. After Tom died, I didn't raise it. Grief made me soft in every direction. "And how much does a similar 3-bedroom in this neighborhood rent for now?" I asked. "I don't know," he muttered. "I do," I said. "I look at the listings. I read the paper. I know exactly what this place is worth." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His phone buzzed. He grabbed at it like a lifeline, glanced at the screen. "Kelsey wants me to remind you to think about what we talked about," he said, standing. "We have a brochure for the senior place we're looking at. They have a game room and a crafts club. It could be really good for you, Mom. You'd have people your own age around, not be stuck here alone all day." "I'm not stuck anywhere," I said. He nodded like we'd agreed on something. "We'll talk more later," he said, and went back upstairs. The keys on the hook clicked gently as the door shut behind him. It wasn't till later, after I'd made myself a grilled cheese sandwich and eaten it over the sink like some teenager with no time, that I let myself really feel it. They weren't just nudging me toward a better place for my own good. They were planning a life that did not include me in this house, their house in their minds. They weren't just pushing me toward a senior apartment. They were practicing life without me. That afternoon I did what I always do when my mind is churning. I cleaned. The downstairs is smaller than the upstairs. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a little living room with a bay window that looks out onto the street and our rose bushes, which at this time of year are just sticks in the dirt. I dusted picture frames. I straightened pillows. I wiped down the glass on the cabinet where I keep my good dishes. On the shelf by the TV stands a framed photo from Brian and Kelsey's wedding. He's standing tall in a rented tux. She's in white with her hair long and loose, her eyes actually soft back then. I had a corsage pinned to my dress, and Tom was standing beside me, his hand on my waist. We look happy, and we were in that moment. I'd mortgaged my future for that wedding, took money out of our home equity line of credit to pay for the catering when Kelsey's parents backed out of their share. I cleaned the glass of that picture slowly, my fingers lingering over Tom's face. Another memory rose up, this one from the kitchen at the reception hall. The smell of roast beef and yeast rolls. Tom and I in a corner, his tie loosened, his face flushed from dancing with me. "You sure about this bill, Lynn?" he'd asked, frowning at the numbers on the invoice. "It's a lot." "It's his day," I'd said. "We only get one shot at this. We'll figure it out." He'd looked at me the way men do when they're a little frustrated, but too in love to argue. "We always do, don't we?" We did. I worked extra hours at the grocery store. He took overtime. We cut corners. We made it work. Because that's what parents do, I thought back then. You stretch your life so your children's lives can be bigger. You might roll your eyes at that now, but back then it made sense to me. It was how I was raised. My parents gave us everything they had and expected nothing but respect and the occasional phone call in return. I put the picture back and walked into the small bedroom that used to be Brian's and is now my sewing room. Along one wall, I have stacks of paper, old bank statements, property tax bills, insurance forms, mortgage documents, all in manila folders. I tell myself I keep them just in case, but I think, deep down, I knew a day like this might come. I pulled out the folder labeled House and took it to the kitchen table, along with my little spiral notebook and a pen. The table is scarred from years of elbows and homework and spilled juice. When I sat down, I set my house key in the middle of the table like a little brass witness. For a long moment, I just looked at that key. Its red leather fob was worn, the stitching frayed. I remembered the weight of it in Tom's hand when he'd put it in mine the day we paid off the first mortgage, his grin wide enough to split his face. "Debt-free, baby," he'd whooped, spinning me in a circle right there in the living room, where the furniture was still that old plaid set from his mom. "This house is ours, no bank, just us." We'd hugged, laughing, our breath mingling. Brian had been in high school then, slamming doors and complaining about curfew. I'd thought, this is security. This is what all the years of sacrifice were for. Over the next decade, we took out a modest line of credit against the house a couple of times. Once for Brian's wedding, once to help him and Kelsey with a down payment on a car when theirs died. Once when Tom lost his job and we needed bridge money. Always with careful calculations. Always with plans to pay it back. Now, Tom is gone, and I am the only one left holding that key. I opened the folder and spread the papers out. Property tax assessments, the mortgage from when we refinanced 10 years ago after Tom's heart attack to consolidate debt and lower the interest. The deed with my name in bold type. In my notebook, I drew 3 columns and labeled them what I give, what I lose, what I keep. Under what I give, I started listing, at first stiffly, and then with more and more speed. Subsidized rent for upstairs since Brian was 23. Free babysitting whenever they needed, including nights and weekends. Groceries borrowed from my pantry. $11,000 from my savings to bail them out of their credit card mess when Kelsey lost her job that first year. The entire cost of their wedding catering. Christmas gifts for Emma that Santa took credit for. Tom's life insurance, which I used partly to fix their bathroom and buy them a new fridge when theirs broke. The time and energy to mow the tiny lawn, tend the roses, clean the common hallway, call the plumber when the pipes made that awful noise. Under what I lose, I wrote, quiet, autonomy, money I could have used for my own retirement, respect, the ability to decide how my own house is used, space in my mind not taken up by worrying about their bills as well as mine, health from stress. Under what I keep, my pen hovered. I wrote, my name on the deed. Then I stared at that lone sentence until the words blurred. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a record of one-way love. And the emptiest column on that page was the one where my own life was supposed to be. Around 3 in the afternoon, there was a knock on my back door. It opened a crack before I could answer. "Grandma, you home?" It was Emma's voice, cautious. "I'm here," I called. She slipped in, all long legs and blonde hair in a messy bun, wearing a sweatshirt from her high school and leggings, 17 years old, forever looking half bored and half embarrassed to exist, like most teenagers. But her eyes are sharp. She notices things. She dropped into the chair across from me, her eyes flicking over the papers, the notebook, the key on the table. "Are you okay?" she asked. I smiled, though it felt like moving a slab of something heavy. "Of course, just doing some organizing." She snorted softly. "Mom's been going on about organizing too," she said, making air quotes. "She's in this weird decluttering mood where everything that belongs to you suddenly looks like junk to her." I winced. She mentioned that. Emma leaned forward. "I heard what she said earlier," she blurted, "about charity. I was in the hallway. I'm sorry, Grandma. She's being intense." I sighed. "She's worried about money, I understand." "Yeah, but she acts like it's her money," Emma said. "This is your house, isn't it?" Her question hung there like a balloon we both were afraid to pop. "Yes," I said finally. "It is." Emma sat back, digesting that. Dad told me some story about how they basically own the house because they pay the bills now, she said, rolling her eyes. But I always thought that sounded wrong, like when he says he basically raised himself. That made me chuckle despite everything. Did he now? He tells everyone you were too busy working to be around, she said. But I remember you picking me up from preschool every day and making that chicken and rice thing I like and sewing my Halloween costumes. She says it's not good for you to be on the stairs at your age, Emma said, like you're going to just fall apart. I've been climbing these stairs since before she was born, I replied. Emma reached out and touched the key with one fingertip. If this is your house, why does she talk like she's doing you a favor, letting you live here? She asked. That question, from a 17-year-old girl, landed harder than anything Kelsey had said, because Emma saw it. She saw the twisted logic. She saw that I had somehow become the guest in my own home. I swallowed. Sometimes, I said slowly, choosing my words, when you've been giving for a long time, people forget it's a choice you're making. They start to think it's just the way things are. They forget there's a cost. Emma's eyes softened. That's messed up, she said. Helping is one thing. Being their backup plan for everything is another. Her words were like a tiny lit candle in a dark room. Maybe you've had that happen. A younger person saying something in plain language that you were too polite to admit to yourself. You can't keep paying for a life that doesn't even have a chair for you at the table, Grandma, she said. You might think teenagers don't notice stuff like that, but they do. They notice who is in the photos and who is always behind the camera. They notice who gets asked for help and who gets thanked. Your parents mean well, I said out of habit. Emma shrugged. Maybe, but that doesn't mean they're right. She pushed her chair back. Anyway, I just wanted you to know I heard. And I don't think you're a charity case. You're like the opposite. I laughed. The opposite of a charity case? Yeah, like you are the charity, she said. Like you've been the one giving all along. She got up to go, then hesitated. If they try to make you move somewhere you don't want to, will you tell me? She asked. Yes, I said, I promise. After she left, the kitchen felt a little less empty. The key on the table seemed to glow in the afternoon light, that bit of red leather like a little flag. Helping is one thing, being their backup plan for everything is another. Those words joined the growing chorus in my mind. That night, I could not sleep. The house was quiet in that particular way old houses get at night. The tick of the cooling radiators, the occasional creak as the wood settled, the distant hum of a car passing by outside. Upstairs, at some point, the TV clicked off, and their footsteps went to bed. I lay on my back, staring at the faint pattern of streetlight shadows on my ceiling. My mind kept replaying Kelsey's tone, the dismissive roll of her eyes, the way Brian had said we when talking about our house. We can't keep doing this. We're not running a charity for old people. It's not fair. For a while, I did what I always do, turned the criticism inward. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe this is just how things are now. Maybe, at my age, I should be grateful to be anywhere other than some nursing home. Maybe I should move to that senior community with the shuttle bus and game nights and pretend it was my idea. I thought of the brochure they'd left on my counter, smiling gray-haired couples playing cards, someone my age doing water aerobics. The marketing copy about safety and community. There's nothing wrong with those places, I told myself. Some women thrive there. They make friends. They're relieved of the burden of home maintenance. But lying there, I realized that's not what this was about. This wasn't about my safety or my social life. This was about control and convenience for them. If you're a woman my age, you know the difference between someone doing something for your sake and doing it for their own sake with your name taped on it. I thought about what I'd lose if I moved, my little garden patch, the bay window where I watched the seasons, the worn spot on the floor where I stood stirring soups, the exact creak in the third stair from the top. These weren't just things. They were pieces of my life. Then my mind swung to the other side, to anger, quiet, unfamiliar anger. I thought about the 3 columns in my notebook, what I give, what I lose, what I keep. I thought about Emma's sentence, "You can't keep paying for a life that doesn't even have a chair for you at the table." I thought about the key on my table, that quiet little strip of metal that meant I had more power than I was acting like I had. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, a strange calm settled over me. No one was going to rescue me from this dynamic. There would be no magical epiphany where my son and his wife suddenly saw the ledger of my sacrifices and burst into tears of gratitude. Life is not a Hallmark movie. Mourning would not bring a prince, but maybe mourning could bring my first real no, not a shouted, dramatic no, a simple, administrative number. I rolled onto my side and finally slept, dreamless. The next day, after my coffee and toast, I took that key from its hook by the door and closed my fingers around it. It felt solid and reassuring in my palm, like a small metallic spine. I put the house folder into my canvas tote bag along with my notebook. I put on my coat and my good shoes. When I passed the hall mirror, I paused. A woman with short gray hair and kind eyes looked back at me. She didn't look like a charity case. She looked like someone who had raised a family and paid a mortgage and worked double shifts to keep the lights on. "You still count," I told her quietly. Then I headed out, locking the door behind me. Our town isn't big. The main street still has a hardware store, a bakery, a bank with an old clock mounted above the door. The bank is where we've always had our accounts. The carpet inside smells faintly of industrial cleaner and old paper. I didn't actually need the bank that day, but I needed the feeling of walking into a place where numbers mattered and where my name meant something official. "Good morning, Mrs. Harris," said the teller, a young man with a neat beard and a name tag that said Jamal. He's always been polite to me, never speaking in that sing-song tone some young people use with older folks, like we're all a little confused. "Good morning," I said. I was wondering if I could speak to someone about my mortgage and property. I have some questions. "Of course," he said. "Let me see if Ms. Patel is free." He led me to an office where a woman about my daughter's age sat behind a desk stacked with folders. She stood and shook my hand. Her grip was firm. "What can I help you with today, Mrs. Harris?" she asked. I took out my papers and laid them on her desk, smoothing the edges. "I own a duplex," I said. "I live in one unit and my son lives in the other. I've been casual about a lot of things. I think that's starting to backfire. I'd like to know exactly where I stand and what my options are." She nodded, scanning the deed, the mortgage. "You're the sole owner," she said after a moment. "No lien holders beyond this mortgage, which is modest. You have excellent payment history. You're in a very solid position, Mrs. Harris." The words "solid position" landed in my chest like a stone in a pond. "What options do I have?" I asked. "If I want to either sell or simply formalize the rental arrangement upstairs, right now it's just, well, family arrangements, handshake deals." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes the hardest leases to write are the ones with family," she said. "But it's good you're thinking about this. You have essentially three options: keep things as they are, turn the property over in some way, sell, gift, or add someone to the deed, or formalize rental agreements and, if you wish, adjust rents to reflect market realities." I took that in. If I wanted to raise the rent on the upstairs unit, I asked, what would that look like? She explained, carefully and simply, about notice periods and fair housing regulations. "Think of it like this," she said at one point, tapping the deed. "Right now, it's as if you've given them a spare key to your house, and they're acting as if they own the whole thing. You're allowed to take your key back, or at least decide which doors it opens." The metaphor made my fingers tighten around the key in my pocket. Taking my key back. "I don't want to be cruel," I said. "I just don't want to be erased in my own home." Ms. Patel nodded. "Setting boundaries around property isn't cruelty," she said. "It's stewardship. You worked hard for this place. You have every right to live in it and manage it in a way that respects that." I left with information rather than signed papers that day. I needed to think, but something had shifted. I walked out of that bank not as a supplicant, but as a woman with options. On my way home, I stopped at the tiny office of a property management company a few blocks past the bank. The sign in the window said Oak Ridge Property Services. Inside, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a thinning hairline introduced himself as Tony. "I don't know if I need your services yet," I told him, "but I might. I have a duplex. I'm tired of being the one everyone assumes will fix everything while also not being taken seriously. I'd like to know what it would take to treat my son's unit like any other rental." Tony listened, then said, "The hardest tenants are family, but you're not the first to be in this spot. If you decide, we can draft a lease, do a rent analysis, act as the go-between. Sometimes having a bad guy who isn't you takes the pressure off." "Bad guy," I repeated, amused. "I don't want to be the bad guy or make one. I just want—" I searched for the word. "Balance?" he suggested. "Yes," I said. "Balance." He gave me his card. "When you're ready, give me a call," he said. "You don't have to decide everything today." I walked home slowly, the cold air biting my cheeks, my fingers curled around my keys in my pocket like they were talismans. They didn't find a confused old woman at the bank or at Tony's office. They found someone finally ready to lock her own doors. When I got home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table again. The key lay beside my notebook, catching the late afternoon sun. I wrote new lines under what I keep, my name on the deed, my right to decide who lives in my house and on what terms, my voice, my peace. Then, for the first time, I considered something I'd never allowed myself to think. I could sell this house. I could move, yes, but on my own terms. Into a place I chose, not one chosen for me, because it was convenient for the upstairs unit. The thought was shocking, like suddenly noticing a door in a room you'd lived in for decades, a door you'd never tried. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Brian. "Hey, Mom, did you think about the senior place? We really need to move forward on this. It's not fair to anyone to drag it out." A moment later, another text. We're looking at refinancing options and need to know what your timeline is. Refinancing. My heart did a funny little hop. I typed back, my fingers surprisingly steady. We'll talk soon. I have some information to share as well. I did not elaborate. I did not explain. I put the phone face down on the table. For once, the most powerful answer I could give them was no answer at all. I didn't have to wait long for the storm. The next morning, as I was making oatmeal, my front door swung open without a knock. Brian marched in, his face tight. "Why did you go to the bank?" he demanded. "Good morning to you, too," I said, stirring my oats. "Don't play games, Mom," he snapped. "I got a notification that someone accessed the mortgage account. I called. They said you were in asking questions about the deed and rental options." I turned off the stove and faced him. The kitchen felt very small. "I went because I needed to understand my position," I said calmly. "It's my right to know." "Our position," he corrected. "This house is our future, Mom. We've been planning around it. We were talking to a broker about refinancing, pulling some equity for Emma's college, and some home improvements. If you start messing with things now, it screws everything up." There it was, the house, as a line of credit for their plans, a cushion, a safety net, for them. "Yes," I said, "I am aware of that." He stared at me. "What are you doing?" he asked. "You're scaring Kelsey. She thinks you're being irrational. She asked if maybe you're, starting to lose it a little." That cut in a way I can't fully put into words. If you're around my age, you know that fear we live with, that any strong emotion will be dismissed with maybe she's getting forgetful. Any reasonable boundary will be labeled confusion. I felt a surprising surge of steel in my spine. "I'm not losing anything," I said quietly. "I know exactly what I'm doing." He laughed, disbelieving. "What? You're going to kick us out? Raise our rent? This is nuts." I met his eyes. "Yes," I said. "I am going to raise your rent to something resembling market rate, and I'm going to draw up a proper lease. I've already spoken to a property manager who will help with that." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked like I'd slapped him. "You can't be serious," he said. "I am," I replied. "On purpose." "This isn't like you," he said. "You're being manipulated. Who's gotten into your head? That guy at the bank, that management guy? Emma? Did Emma say something?" I thought of Emma's clear eyes, her simple words. "No one had to get into my head," I said. "I've been living in there this whole time. I just finally decided to listen to myself." He paced the tiny kitchen, running his hands through his hair. "We can't afford market rent," he said. "You know that. Between the car payment, the student loan, Emma's activities, the credit cards. And yet," I said, "you are planning to refinance this house and pull money out of it. That's different. That's smart financial planning." "It's planning built on the assumption that I'm already gone," I said. He winced. "That's not fair." "It's not fair," I agreed. "It's also true. You've been treating this house like it's yours to mine, and me like a temporary inconvenience." He stopped, stung. "We've been taking care of you," he said defensively. "We handle the bills. We mow the lawn. You pay under market rent," I interrupted gently. "You're not taking care of me, Brian. You're taking advantage of me. Maybe you didn't mean to start that way, but that's where we are now." His face flushed. "So what? Now you're going to evict us? Throw your son and granddaughter out into the street?" The manipulation was so blatant that for once it didn't work. "No," I said. "I am going to offer you a choice. You can stay under a formal lease at a fair price that we will agree on with the property manager. Or you can choose to move somewhere else. But the days of you treating my house and me like a personal ATM are over." He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You can't do this," he said weakly. "Yes," I said. "I can, and I am." Later that afternoon, there was another knock on my door, much softer this time. Kelsey's head appeared in the doorway. Her makeup was perfect, her mouth in a polite line. "Can we talk?" she asked. I gestured to the table. She sat gingerly, like she didn't want to catch something. "Brian tells me you're making some changes," she began, folding her manicured hands. "I am," I said. She let out a light laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said. "We're family. We don't need leases and formalities. What would people think if they heard we had a rental contract with you? It sounds cold." "What people think," I said, "has been your concern for a long time. I've watched you stage Thanksgiving dinners as if they're photo shoots. I've heard you talk about how it'll look if we don't have the right decorations. Meanwhile, I've been covering the difference between what you pay and what this house costs. That's cold, too, in its own way." She blinked. "I just want things to be nice," she said, "for all of us." "Nice," I repeated. "I'm sure it would look nicer if I smiled and cooperated while you moved me into a senior complex and refinanced my house from under me. But it wouldn't feel nice to live like that." "Now you're just being dramatic," she said. "We were only exploring options. We weren't going to do anything without your consent." "Except," I said, "you already act as if you own this house. You answer the door like it's yours, give people tours, tell them about our property. You talk about when Mom's gone as if I'm a piece of old furniture to be moved out when it suits you." A flicker of guilt crossed her face. Then calculation. "We just assumed," she said slowly, "that you'd want to do whatever's best for Emma, for her future." "There's that word again," I said. "Assumed." She leaned forward, her voice lowering. "Think about what you're doing," she said. "Do you really want this conflict at your age? Do you want to be the woman who raised the rent on her own son? Do you want to be alone when you're old with nobody around because you pushed us away?" Ah, there it was. The quiet terror button. Loneliness. I felt it press. But this time, it didn't crush me. "I'm not pushing you away," I said softly. "I'm drawing a line. I'm saying I deserve to be in my own life, not just funding yours." She sniffed. "You're making a big mistake." "I've made bigger ones," I said. "This is me trying to correct them." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping. "Well," she said, tight-lipped, "we'll see what Emma thinks about you making her homeless." "Please don't drag Emma into this," I said. "This is between the adults." "She's affected," Kelsey said. "We're all affected. You're worried about being erased? Think about what you're erasing for your granddaughter." And then she left, leaving the faint smell of expensive perfume and resentment behind her. I sat there for a long time, listening to the footsteps overhead. The house felt like it held its breath. "You're worried about how it looks," I murmured to the empty kitchen. "I'm worried about how it feels to live like this." On the table, my house key lay quietly, its red fob a small, stubborn spot of color. The big scene, as I now think of it, happened 2 weeks later. In that time, I had met again with Tony from Oak Ridge Property, gone over rental comps, and agreed on a reasonable number for the upstairs unit. It was higher than what Brian and Kelsey had been paying, but not unreasonable. Tony drafted a standard lease. I read every word, my glasses low on my nose, my finger following the lines. "Are you comfortable with this?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "For the first time in a long time, I am." I asked him to be present when I presented the lease, partly to give it weight and partly so I wouldn't be alone in their reactions. We picked a Sunday afternoon. I invited Brian and Kelsey down for a house meeting, as I put it. I also invited Emma, though I didn't require her presence. She came anyway, sitting quietly at the end of the table, her fingers playing with the sleeve of her sweater. The four of us sat at my kitchen table. The house key lay beside the stack of papers. Tony sat to my right, his briefcase by his feet, his presence calm. "What's this about?" Brian asked, his jaw already set. I took a deep breath. "As you know," I began, "I own this house. It is legally and financially my property. You have been living in the upstairs unit under very informal terms. That has led to confusion and hurt on all sides. To correct that, I have decided to formalize our arrangement." I nodded to Tony. He slid the lease across the table to Brian and Kelsey. "What is this?" Kelsey asked, picking it up, scanning. Her lips moved as she read, "Landlord Linda Harris. Tenant Brian Harris and Kelsey Harris. Premises upper unit." "It's a standard rental lease," Tony said politely. "This outlines the terms of your tenancy, including rent amount, responsibilities, notice periods, and so on." "We don't need a lease," Brian said, color rising in his face. "We're family." "Exactly," I said. "We're family. That's why I let things go so long. But family doesn't mean there are no boundaries. It doesn't mean I have to subsidize you indefinitely or be erased in my own home." "This rent is insane," Kelsey burst out, jabbing the number with her finger. "We can't afford this." "This rent is in line with current market rates for comparable units in this area," Tony said calmly. "In fact, it's slightly below." "We're not strangers," she said to him, then turned to me. "You're really going to treat us like tenants? Like some random people off the street?" I looked at Emma, then back at them. My voice shook a little, but held. "You've been happy to treat me like a random landlord," I said. "Someone whose property you plan around without consulting. Someone you can move out when she's inconvenient. You love what I do for you. I'm not sure you've loved me for a long time." The words landed like small stones dropped in water, rippling outward. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Mom," she said softly, "Grandma's not wrong." Kelsey whipped her head toward her. "Stay out of this, Emma." "Why?" Emma said, her voice surprisingly firm. "You talk about Grandma like she's a burden all the time, like she's lucky to be here. You act like you're saints for taking her in when it's her house." The room went very still. "That's not how it is," Brian started. "It is," Emma said. "You say stuff like, we can't keep funding her lifestyle, and once Grandma's gone, we can finally do what we want with the place. I've heard you." Kelsey's hand flew to her chest. "I never—" "You did," Emma said, "more than once." If you've ever sat at a table like that yourself, trying not to cry, you know the feeling, the mix of shame and relief when the truth finally spills out. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I said. "I'm doing this because I cannot live the rest of my life as a ghost in my own house. I am willing to be your landlord. I am willing to be your mother. But I am no longer willing to be your cushion." "What if we don't sign?" Brian asked, his voice low. "Then," Tony said gently, "you would be given proper notice to vacate, just as any tenants would. This isn't about throwing you into the street tomorrow. It's about bringing clarity to everyone's responsibilities. Kelsey shook her head in disbelief. You're choosing money over family, she said. No, I replied. I'm choosing dignity, and I'm choosing not to let my fear of being alone make me accept being disrespected. We sat in silence. A car passed by outside. Somewhere in the house, a pipe ticked. Can we have some time to think about it? Brian asked finally, deflated. Of course, I said. You have 30 days to decide, and if you choose not to sign, 60 days after that to find a new place. I'm not heartless, Brian. I know moving is hard, but my heart has been aching in this arrangement for a long time. He nodded slowly. I need to process, he said. Me too, Kelsey muttered. They left in a swirl of hurt feelings and slammed doors. Emma lingered. Grandma, she whispered, coming to my side. That was... wow. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 10 years. Are you okay? She asked. I smiled, exhausted. I think I might be, I said, for the first time in a while. She glanced at the key on the table. They're freaking out over rent, she said, but they never freaked out over you helping them. That says a lot. It does, I agreed. She hugged me, her arms around my shoulders, her hair smelling faintly of shampoo. I'm proud of you, she murmured. If you're a mother, you know how rare and precious those words are when they come from the younger ones. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. At first, there were flurries of texts from Brian and Kelsey, questions, protests, attempts to renegotiate without Tony, pleased to keep things as they were. I responded minimally, always copying Tony, always referring back to the lease. I did not engage in emotional arguments. Some days, the upstairs was so silent, I wondered if they were avoiding walking over certain floorboards so I wouldn't hear them. Other days, I could hear muffled voices, fights, maybe. Money puts a pressure on people that leaks into everything. A month later, they told me they'd made a decision. We're going to move, Brian said, standing in my doorway. His voice was flat. I'm sorry it came to this, I said honestly. I never wanted to force you out. You didn't force us, he said. You set terms we can't meet. That's the same thing. It's not, I said, but I understand why it feels that way. Kelsey, who stood slightly behind him, arms crossed, said, We're looking at a townhouse on the other side of town. Smaller, crappier neighborhood, but at least we won't have to sign a lease with our own mother. The way she spat mother stung, but less than it might have before. I hope you find a place that suits you, I said. You'll be all alone here, she added. I hope that's worth it to you. Her words were meant as a curse, but they slid off me. I had already imagined the quiet and found that it did not scare me as much as living in a house where my existence was an inconvenience. I think it might be, I said. They moved out over a gray Saturday in early spring. I watched from my bay window as they carried boxes down the stairs, loaded them into a rental truck. Kelsey directed with sharp gestures. Brian's shoulders slumped. Emma made 2 trips carrying her own boxes. On her last run, she slipped down to my apartment. Her eyes were red. I'm going to text you all the time, she said, hugging me fiercely. Mom says we won't be coming around much because it'll be awkward, but I don't care. I'll drive myself. I'll always have a key for you, I said, pressing a copy of the upstairs unit's key into her hand. You're welcome here whenever you want. Your room will always be upstairs in my heart. She laughed through her tears. That's cheesy, she said. but I like it. When they finally drove away, the house was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood in the empty upstairs unit later that day, looking out the window at the bare branches of the maple in the front yard. The rooms echoed in a way they hadn't in years. I could have cried. Instead, I took a deep breath and imagined new people living here. Maybe a young couple, maybe an older woman like me. Tenants who would sign a lease and pay rent and not confuse my love with obligation. Tony found new tenants within a month, a nurse and a teacher, both in their 30s, respectful and grateful to find a place in this neighborhood. They signed the lease without drama. They brought me a plant on move-in day. "Thank you for renting to us," the nurse said, smiling. "Thank you for choosing to live here," I replied. The first time the new rent payment hit my account, I stared at the number. It was more than I'd been getting before, enough to cover the mortgage and the taxes, with some left over. Enough that, for the first time since Tom died, I felt the ground under my feet solidly. I began to build a little cushion of my own. My new normal is quieter, yes, but it is not lonely in the way Kelsey predicted. I volunteer twice a week at the library now, shelving books and reading to children during story hour. The kids climb into my lap and ask for just one more, like toddlers have always done. On Tuesdays, I go to a senior exercise class at the community center. We move our arms in time to oldies music, laughing at our own stiffness. I've made a friend there, a widow named Maria, who has stories that make mine look tame. Some evenings, I sit in my bay window with a cup of tea and watch the lights of my own house glow softly. My downstairs, their upstairs. I hear the murmur of the nurse and the teacher moving around. Their lives are theirs. Mine is mine. Emma comes by once a week, true to her word, sometimes more. She brings coffee, stories from her first job at a coffee shop, worries about college. "Mom's still mad," she told me one afternoon, curling up on my couch, her sneakers kicked off. "She says you chose money over us and that we had to downgrade because of you." "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle," I said. She shrugged. "Honestly, I like our new place. It's smaller, but it feels calmer. And Mom and Dad are actually talking about budgeting now instead of assuming there'll always be more. I think they miss the cushion, but maybe this is good for them." "Maybe," I said. "Dad, he misses you," she added softly. "He won't admit it, but I can tell. The other day he drove by here by accident when we were going somewhere else." My heart twinged. "He's always welcome to visit," I said, "under the same terms as everyone else, respect and honesty." She smiled. "You're kind of a badass, Grandma," she said, in a friendly cardigan way. I laughed. "I'll take that." The softer follow-up from Brian came on a Sunday evening in late summer. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my key on the hook behind me, a crossword puzzle in front of me. The roses outside were in full bloom again. There was a tentative knock at the door. "Come in," I called. He stepped in, looking older than his 48 years. There were new lines around his mouth, a kind of sagging around the eyes that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with stress. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hi," I replied. He looked around, as if cataloging what had changed. Not much, really. My world is small and doesn't require constant updating. "I was in the neighborhood," he said. "Of course you were," I said gently. "Come sit." He sat at the table in the same chair where he'd once swung his legs as a boy, refusing to eat his peas. He glanced at the hook where my key hung, red fob bright against the wood. "How's the new place?" I asked. "It's okay," he said. "Smaller. Emma hates the longer drive to school, but she's managing. Money's tight, but we're figuring it out." I nodded. "I'm glad you're figuring it out." There was a long pause. "I was angry," he said suddenly. "Really angry. I thought you were choosing strangers over us. I thought you were punishing us for wanting to plan ahead." "And now?" I asked. He rubbed his forehead. "Now I see we were planning ahead with assets that weren't actually ours," he said. "We just assumed. I assumed. That because I'm your son, because we'd always done things a certain way, you'd keep doing them. I didn't see how lopsided it had become." Tears pricked the backs of my eyes. I blinked them away. "I didn't teach you boundaries very well," I said. "I taught you sacrifice and generosity. I didn't teach you how to stop taking when enough was enough." "I'm sorry," he said. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "I'm sorry I made you feel like a burden in your own home. I'm sorry for what Kelsey said. I'm sorry I let her think we were doing you a favor by letting you live here." "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." He swallowed. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course," I said. "If we get our finances in order," he said haltingly, "if we can someday pay a fair rent, would you ever consider renting to us again?" "Not now," he added quickly. "I know we're not there yet. I miss this place. I miss you. I miss the smell of your cooking. I miss knowing you're downstairs." My heart did that strange combination of ache and warmth. "You'll always be my son," I said. "You can always ask, and I will always be free to say yes or no." He nodded slowly. "That's fair," he said. We sat for a while longer, talking about normal things. Emma's classes, his job, a show we both liked. When he left, he hugged me, holding on a little tighter and longer than he had in years. As the door closed behind him, I looked at the key on the hook. It was still my key. But the fear that had once clung to it, fear of being alone, of being unwanted, felt lighter. Now, years later, that key is still here. It hangs on the same hook by the door, its red leather worn even more, the brass dulled by time. I still touch it almost every time I pass, a little habit I've picked up like some women touch their wedding rings or rosary beads. It started as an everyday object, just a way to get into my house. Then it became the witness of all my sacrifices, the nights I turned it in the lock after long shifts, the mornings I hung it up so I could carry bags of groceries to cook for others. At my lowest point, it was the thing I saw when my daughter-in-law called me a charity case, a symbol of how far I'd let myself be pushed out of my own story. Later, it became my silent ally, the thing in my pocket when I walked into the bank and the property manager's office, the tangible reminder that I had more power than I'd been using. It was the emblem on the table when I laid out those 3 columns and finally wrote myself into the what I keep category. And now? Now it's just my key again. But it also means something more. It represents the door I chose to keep for myself, the door to a life where I am not the charity case, but the woman who built the house in the first place. The woman who learned, a little late but not too late, that love without boundaries turns into something else. The woman who, even in her late 60s, could change the script. If you're listening to this and you're sitting in a house you've paid for, or an apartment you've made a home and you feel yourself shrinking to fit someone else's comfort, Maybe it's time to look at your own key. Maybe it's a literal key. Maybe it's the PIN to your bank account, or the password to your email, or the title to your car. Whatever it is, hold it in your hand for a moment. Ask yourself which column you've been living in, what you give, what you lose, what you keep. You are allowed to have a third column. Your life belongs there too. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you from my heart. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? I would really love to know. Come tell me in the comments so we can feel a little less alone in this big world. If you enjoy life stories like this and you'd like to help me keep making them, you can support me with a super thanks here on YouTube. That little button means more than you know. Thank you so much for your kind hearts and your gentle ears. On the screen, you should see 2 more stories I really recommend if you want to keep me company a little longer. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next life story. Until then, take good care of yourselves. And remember, your life belongs in that third column too, with love and respect.